My name is Maggie Johnson. I'm 79 years old today, and I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. And I know, when an old woman like that starts talking, people get ready for a story about harvest, marriage, and corn cake. But no, what I have to tell is of a different kind. My sister jumped out of the window to get away from our grandfather, and I stayed. I stayed to endure the punishment that was meant for both of us. It didn't happen overnight, you see. It built up slowly, like mold on an old wall, and like all mold, no one wanted to see it. My sister's name was Rebecca. We were very young when it happened, and she ran away. We'd been living at Grandma Martha and Grandpa Luther's house since our parents died in a car accident. A bad bend, early in the morning, a drunk truck. They said it was a miracle we survived. Today I think that maybe it wasn't a miracle. It was punishment. At first it seemed like it was going to work out. Grandma was a church member, made apple pie, wore long skirts, and combed our hair every Sunday. Grandpa? He worked in a garage and could fix anything, except himself. Over time, I noticed that Rebecca was quieter. She'd always been lively, chatty, the kind who makes up music with a spoon banging on a glass. But one day she stopped. At first I thought she missed her mother. Then I thought it was a child's tantrum. Only later did I begin to see that it wasn't that. It was when he was at home that she kept quiet. It was when he passed by that she held her breath. I remember one day she spilled juice on the kitchen towel. Silly thing. But he stood there, staring at the stain as if it were gasoline on a fire escape. She froze. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," she said in a thin voice. And he, "No need to apologize. Just walk me down to the basement and we'll sort it out." Grandma didn't even blink. She carried on washing the dishes, and I didn't understand. I just saw her eyes looking at me, as if she was saying, "Don't let me go." But she went. She came back an hour later with a dusty arm and a cut on her knee. She said she had fallen down the stairs. I wanted to believe her. Little by little, Rebecca started sleeping in my room more and more. She said she had bad dreams and was afraid of the dark. But whenever Grandpa passed her in the hallway, she would hide under the covers, like broken glass, trying to glue it back together. Once she cried into her pillow at dawn, quietly. I heard it. I stayed silent, pretending to sleep. Fear held me back, and shame. And that's when I began to feel something was wrong. And I knew it. I just didn't want to know. One day, I caught her writing on a crumpled piece of paper. She hid it as soon as she saw me. I insisted, "Show me Rebecca." She looked at me and cried. It was a letter. It said, "If I'm not here anymore, it's not because I don't love you. It's because I can't take it anymore. You understand, don't you, Ellie? Forgive me. I just wanted to leave before he called me again." My heart almost stopped. She knew I knew, and I knew she no longer expected help, just a way out. The next day, she didn't go to school. I was worried. Grandma said she had a fever. I wanted to go into her room, but the door was locked. Locked from the inside, or from the outside, I never knew. On the night of that day, I heard the window creak. It was her, backpack on her back, slippers in hand. "Rebecca," I whispered. She looked at me one last time. "I'm sorry for leaving you." And she jumped. She was gone. The house was a blur after that. Grandma cried more than she prayed. She said the police would look. But they didn't seem to be looking for anyone. And Grandpa, he said that these girls today don't know how to be grateful, that Rebecca would come back when hunger struck. But she never came back. And 3 days after she ran away, Grandpa called me down to the basement. "It's just you now, Maggie. You and me." That's when I understood. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. If you've made it this far, dear, please comment from where you're listening. Because telling it after so many years makes my stomach turn. But it's only by starting that we can get out. After Rebecca jumped out of the window, I stood there in the dark for hours, holding the blanket with my teeth so I wouldn't scream. She didn't look back. And I couldn't run after her either. Fear outweighed my body. The house was asleep, or pretending to be. But I knew that the night had just begun for me. Grandpa didn't say anything the next morning. He passed me in the kitchen, picked up the bottle of coffee, and said the police were coming. Grandma said she was going to say the rosary for the two of them. Two, as if I'd disappeared too. But I was there, alive, standing in the doorway, my stomach churning. and no one could see me. Only him. He did. He looked at me as if I was just a plate of food left over from the party. 3 days later, he called me into the basement. He didn't explain anything. He just said, "Come and help me with some boxes." Grandma was washing clothes outside, as she always did on those muggy afternoons. I went downstairs with my legs shaking. The musty smell was the same. The dark seemed darker than ever. There was a light bulb hanging from the ceiling, dim and swinging. He pointed to the corner and said he needed to clean some tools. When I turned around, I felt the air change. He had locked the door upstairs. The sound of the lock chilled me to the bone. My body didn't react. My voice didn't come out. He approached slowly, as if he was going to pick up something that had fallen on the floor. But it was me. He grabbed me by the arm. He said that the girl who stays has to pay for what the other left. And he started saying things that I couldn't quite understand, except that he always said this: "You have to make up for it." The blouse I was wearing was old, faded. He pulled it up without a care. "Be quiet. No one will hear." And no one did. Not the grandmother who was upstairs. Not the neighbors. Nobody. He left me lying there on the cold floor while he told me that I was his now, and that Rebecca would regret running away. In his mind, that was a lesson. In my body, it was just pain. It hurt as if the whole world had gotten under my skin and scratched every bit of it. After he'd finished, he threw me a dirty cloth to wipe my face. He said it was not to make a fuss. He went up the stairs whistling. He left me there with dried blood sticking to my leg and the taste of dust in my mouth. I couldn't get up for a while. When I finally got up, Grandma asked if I was all right. She said I looked pale. I said I'd slipped on the stairs. She said I had to pay more attention, and she went back to her sewing. I went to my room, closed the door, and angrily ripped off my clothes. I wanted to rip my skin off with it. I washed myself as best I could with laundry soap and cold water in a basin. The water turned red, then brown, then transparent. But I kept scrubbing, as if I would ever be clean again. I didn't sleep that night. The bed felt like it had needles in it. The sheet scratched. Every noise in the house made me cringe. He passed through the hall and knocked on the door twice. He didn't say anything. He just knocked. And I understood. It was going to continue. And it was going to get worse. At breakfast, Grandma talked about how ungrateful Rebecca was. She said that if she had any sense, she would have come back. I just listened, stirring my spoon in my empty cup. I didn't feel hungry, nor thirst, just something I couldn't even name, something that squeezed my chest, as if it were an invisible hand trying to crush my heart. The next few days were all the same. He would wait for the house to quieten down, wait for Grandma to go to sleep. Sometimes he knocked on the door, sometimes not even that. He just walked in, and did, and left. Some days I pretended to be ill, others I hid a knife under my pillow, but it was no use. He knew the steps I took. He knew when I was pretending. He even knew when I was breathing wrong. One night, I bled so much, I thought I was going to die. I curled up in the corner of the bed, soiling everything, and he laughed. "Now you understand why your sister ran away." I didn't talk to anyone. Not at school. Not to Grandma. Not even to God. I remained silent. It was my only shield. Silence was my wall. Because if I spoke, he could shut me up in a worse way. And I knew that silence was what he liked best. Once, at the dinner table, he squeezed my leg under the tablecloth. Hard. I remained motionless. Grandma asked if I was going to do it again. I just shook my head. Because I couldn't even chew. Everything made me crave it. Even the smell of the meat. Even the sound of the spoon hitting the plate. One day he took a cardboard box down to the basement. He said it was a present for me. I was forced to follow. It was a shoebox with an old doll inside. He said it was for me to play with when he wasn't home, and that I could give it a name. I said I didn't want to. He told me to kneel down and say thank you. I did. But inside me, something began to die for good. It wasn't anger yet. It was just death. Death inside. Because if you die inside, sometimes they stop. But it didn't stop. It continued. It always continued. At school, a teacher asked if I had anemia. I said it was just weakness. She said I was losing weight. I smiled. I said it was a diet. Everyone thought it was funny. I laughed too. On the outside, inside, there was no more laughter. There was only counting. I counted the days. I counted the minutes between his steps. I counted how many times Grandma went to church. I counted how many times I managed to hold back my tears until I got to the bathroom, because crying in front of him was teasing, and to tease was to sign a sentence. One night, he drank. A lot. Grandma was snoring. He stumbled into the room. He said he was going to repeat what he did with his sister. It made me shiver. I screamed. For the first time, I screamed, but nobody heard, or they pretended not to. He pushed me down on the bed and said, "Do you want to make a fuss? Then learn for real now." What he did that night, to this day, I feel sick just remembering it. But it was also the day I started planning, not how to escape, because I wasn't like Rebecca. She was light, smart. I was resigned. I planned another way, a slower way, a quieter way, because there are punishments you get back without having to shout. After that night when I shouted, something changed. Not in the world, not in the house, but in me. The scream came from a place so deep that I didn't even know it existed. I thought he was going to kill me, and maybe he thought it too, because it took him a while to act. He stood there for a few seconds looking at my face, with anger in his eyes, and his breathing ragged. Then he got up, cursed softly, and slammed the door. He didn't lock it. He didn't come back that morning. I spent the rest of the night awake, with the blanket pulled up to my chin like a suit of armor. When morning came, I went down to the kitchen and found Grandma stirring porridge in the iron pot. She said she'd had a bad dream, that someone in the family was in danger. I watched the steam rise, trying to imagine whether she was talking about me or Rebecca, whether it was a divine warning or just guilt disguised as faith. Grandpa arrived later, quietly. He sat down, ate, and left. He didn't touch me. He didn't even say my name. It seemed like a truce, but it wasn't. It was calculation. He was planning something too. The next few days were a minefield. He avoided direct contact, but passed close enough to remind me that he was still in charge. He stared at me for too many seconds. He squeezed objects hard, slammed doors for no reason, all to keep me in the state he liked. Alert, mute, broken. At school, I started copying down the departure times, who took which bus, which girls walked together to the end of the street. I watched everything, not to run away. I already knew that running away was no longer an option, but because I wanted to understand the pattern of the world. If you understand how everything moves, you learn to escape without leaving your seat. The science teacher commented that I seemed more attentive. She said my notebook was more organized. I replied with a toothless grin. She didn't understand the irony. She thought I was getting better. Improving, at that time, meant being able to pretend more efficiently. In the playground, I sat next to two girls who were always talking about their mothers, siblings, and birthdays. One of them told me that her grandfather used to take her fishing at the lake. I felt my stomach turn. Mine did too, only it wasn't fish he wanted to catch. I started saving objects, small ones, coins found on the sofa, clips from school, old tapes, anything that seemed useful for an idea that didn't even exist yet. He would hide everything in a sewn sock and leave it between the mattress and the wood of the bed. One night, he came in again, quietly, standing at the foot of the bed. The light from the corridor left only his shadow crossing my room. He said nothing. He didn't even move. He just stood there for a couple of minutes. Then he turned and left. The next day, I found the doll he had given me with its eyes crossed out in pen. That wasn't a scare. It was a warning. One Tuesday, while Grandma was having tea with a neighbor, he called me into the garage. He said he needed help with the gate. I was reluctant. He gave me that come or go look. I did. I held a wrench so tightly that my hand hurt. He said something about tools, but I only heard his footsteps around me. His every move made my body prepare to run. When he got too close, I turned quickly and dropped the tool on the floor. The noise was loud. The neighbor looked out the window. He backed away. He said I was clumsy, and he went inside. From that day on, I started making more noise. I'd bang a glass against the sink, drag a chair, let the tap drip. Anything to break the silence he used as a shield. He hated noise. Grandma said he was a man of peace. I knew that peace for him was the silence of a quiet girl. On Sunday, he tried to touch me again. He put his hand on my shoulder during lunch. I dropped my spoon. Grandma looked. He laughed. He said I was inattentive, but I could see the annoyance in his eyes. I was out of line. It didn't take long for him to react. One morning, I woke up to the sound of the door handle turning slowly. I jumped out of bed and hid behind the door. When he came in, I already had the penknife from the drawer hidden in my hand, pointed at myself. I looked him in the eye and said, "If you touch me, I'll cut myself." He froze, not because he cared, but because he realized I wasn't the same anymore. He said I was going crazy. I replied that madness was the only thing still keeping me alive. He left. He locked his room. For the first time, he locked it from the outside. From then on, I started writing. I used toilet paper, bread paper, anything. I wrote names, dates, places. I kept everything in an old recipe book from Grandma. He wrote as if it were a way of reminding me that I still existed, that what he did to me couldn't be erased, that even if he erased my body, my trace would still be there. I prepared to disappear, but leaving the right crumbs. 2 weeks before my 16th birthday, he gave me a present, a box. Inside, an old bracelet and a note. "Now you're a grown woman." I remembered what he'd said to Rebecca before she ran away. It was the same phrase. He recycled his misdeeds. It was a script, a cycle. I took the box, went down to the basement, opened the drain, and threw everything in. I wanted it to be lost, along with the other things he threw away. That night, I decided that I wasn't going to run away like Rebecca. I was going to make him see me, really see, to feel what it's like to have a girl who doesn't bend, who doesn't cry in front of you, who doesn't pray quietly for salvation. I wasn't a miracle. I was a consequence. But for that, I had to go deeper, much deeper, because the punishment wasn't over yet, and I was still a prisoner in that basement. Only now, I also had the keys. And what came after that, darling? That's when things started to turn around. After I threw that bracelet down the drain, something in me hardened. It wasn't courage yet. It was cold anger, the kind that doesn't scream or explode. It just takes over slowly, like rust on a chain. I no longer responded as before. I started looking him in the eye. When he called me, I went, but with a firm body. Inside, I was just stone. I learned to hide the trembling in my fingers by digging my nails into my palms. My face was still. My gaze was fixed, and I began to pay attention to his weaknesses. Every monster has his own. He liked control. I knew that. His pleasure was knowing that we obeyed. When Rebecca ran away, he didn't expect it. And with that, he lost his ground. I was what was left, the part he thought he could still shape. Only I was already broken in a way that couldn't be mended. So I decided to use that. I pretend to be fine, but I watch everything, every step, every breath, every crossed word. I started marking on the school calendar the days when he touched me. I used a colored pencil and made a little red dot in the corner of the sheet. I watched that January fill up with spots. Each dot was a scar that no one could see, but I did, and it reminded me, I'm not going mad. This is really happening. And I'm putting it all together. The following Tuesday, I went to the reading room. I picked up a medical book. I pretended it was research. I wrote down terms, bruises, contusions, internal fractures. Then another book, about laws. I read quietly, writing down words I didn't understand, asking the teacher carefully, without arousing suspicion. She thought I wanted to be a nurse. I let her think. It was better that way. The more she thought I was dreaming, the less she would wonder why I was really interested. At home, I carried on as expected. I did the laundry, I ironed, I heated up dinner, but I always left clues. Small things, a hair in Grandpa's spoon, a nail in the middle of the stairs, a scrunched-up piece of paper thrown where Grandma could find it, all disguised. Everything made to look like an accident, because if I disappeared, I wanted there to be a trace. And if he did to me what he did to the other girl, someone would see that it wasn't without warning. Grandma continued to believe in her world. When I asked her if she ever suspected anything, She said that young girls have a lot of imagination, that Rebecca had always been difficult, that I, at least, was better behaved. I almost dropped my plate. I had to take a deep breath, not to spit out everything I was holding in my throat. I replied that too much imagination is when you'd rather dream than look at what's right in front of you. She said that I was getting a little too responsive, and that it was a lack of slippers. I shut up, because she wasn't the one I needed to argue with. She was blind by choice. I wasn't going to be able to open eyes that she herself had closed. Grandpa, on the other hand, began to notice my change. He would test me with leading questions. "You're very clever now, aren't you, girl?" I said yes, that I was studying harder, that I wanted a future. He laughed. He laughed in that way that has contempt, not humor. He said that no woman needs a book, that women who know too much are hard work. One day he asked, "Are you thinking of running away too?" And I said, "No, I'm different from Rebecca." He seemed pleased. Little did he know that that was precisely the difference. It was on a Friday night that things went off the rails. He drank more than usual. Grandma had already gone to bed. The house was silent, just the clock on the wall ticking away. He staggered into the room. He sat on the edge of my bed and pulled me by the arm. I reacted, not with a shout, not with force. I just looked, firmly. I said, "Not today." He laughed. He said I wasn't in charge of anything, that it was his, that my job was to shut up and obey. I pulled my arm back. He stood up. He hit me. A dry slap across the face. It hurt, but it hurt less than the other times, because this time I was ready. I stood up. I stood in front of him, and I said, "Hit me harder. Let's see how far you go." He stepped back for half a second, not because he was scared, but because he wasn't expecting it. He stretched out his hand again. I didn't flinch. I stood still. He stopped. He looked at me. He said I was getting cheeky. He was going to teach me a lesson. The next morning, I woke up with a black eye. Grandma said I'd fallen out of bed. I let her think about it. I went to school with borrowed sunglasses. When the teacher asked, I said I'd tripped, but a classmate saw. She looked at me with a look I'd never seen before, woman to woman, and she whispered, "If you want, call me, that's all." She didn't say anything else. He just left a piece of paper with a number on it in my case. That made me shudder, because I realized there were people watching, people who might know or be suspicious. What if I planted more signs? What if I left more clues? I started writing loose sentences in my school notebooks. "Help me. He's coming at night. I have nowhere to run." Always in the middle of class texts, on the back of the pages. If they found it, they'd think it was some weird teenage thing. But what if they joined the dots? On Sunday, Grandma went to church alone. I said I had colic. I stayed at home, and I went down to the basement. I took some matches, gum, a bottle of vinegar, and some threads I found behind the cupboard. I spent hours down there, rummaging through old things, looking for what he was hiding. I found a locked wooden box. Inside, photos, children's clothes, notes in children's handwriting, everything of Rebecca's. He kept everything, like a trophy. I cried a lot and put everything in a bag. I buried it in the yard, behind the fig tree, because if he wanted to hide it, I wanted to show it. One day, when the time came, the Monday after burying the box, he came home early from work. I was surprised. Grandma hadn't come back from the market yet, and I was washing the lunch dishes, trying to control my breathing. The sound of keys hitting the wall made my stomach turn. He hadn't spoken to me for 2 days, since his last threat in the hallway. His silence was more frightening than his shouting. When he came into the kitchen, he stood looking at me like someone examining a wounded dog. I stood back, pretending not to notice. "Did you go down into the basement?" The question came dryly, bluntly. The soap slipped from my fingers. I tried to disguise it. I said I was just looking for an old broom. I didn't touch anything. He approached slowly. The wooden floor made that creaking sound I already knew by heart. Every step was a warning. He pulled up behind me. I felt the hot breath on the back of my neck. "Lying is worse than ingratitude, miss." His hand touched my shoulder, icy, hard. I struggled not to react. He smelled of sweat, grease, and cheap beer. "If I find out you've taken what's mine..." I turned around. I looked him in the eye. "What was yours is long gone." He pushed the plate into the sink. It shattered on the floor. He said he was warning me. He went up to his room and slammed the door. His anger overflowed, but for the first time I saw something different. Fear. He felt that something had escaped. I stood there, trembling, looking at the shards scattered around. I knew he wouldn't get away with it. When someone like him loses control, he has to punish. And it was always the same with me. I just didn't know when or how. That night, I slept with my chair against the doorknob. I had a bread knife under my pillow. I heard footsteps in the hallway, but he didn't try to come in. Perhaps because he knew that now I was no longer just the quiet girl. Now I was setting traps. The next day, I came home from school with a torn notebook. He had come into my room while I was out. He searched. He found the papers hidden in the clothes drawer, the scribbles with dates, phrases, records. He threw everything in the garbage can. Grandma thought it was just dirt. Your grandfather is right. That girl has been drawing too many sad pictures. He stood laughing at the table, chewing slowly, with that look that said, I'm still in charge. Only he didn't realize that I had copies. Everything was stored somewhere else. I had already learned that with people like him, you never leave everything in one place. I also wrote in the bathroom at school, behind the water tank, inside the sole of my shoe. I became a living archive. On Saturday, he invented that his bike had a flat tire and that I had to help out in the workshop. Grandma was going to spend the day at a friend's house. I knew it was a trap, but I went. No resistance. I wanted to see how far he would go. When I got inside, he locked the door. He said we'd sort it out now. He pushed me against the workbench, knocking over tools. I tried to get free. He held on tighter. Tell me where it is. I spat on the floor. He said it was buried, that I wasn't afraid of him anymore, that he could hit me, shout at me, do whatever he wanted, but I wasn't going to shut up. He came at me and I fell to my knees, trying to breathe. He kicked his tools on the floor, paced back and forth like a cornered animal. You disrespect me in this house. I raised you, you ingrate. I gave you everything after your parents died. I stood up with difficulty. You gave everything. You just took it away. He picked up a strap, the same one he used to tie up his tools. He told me to kneel down. He said I was going to learn. I stood up, bleeding from the mouth, but standing. Are you going to hit me now? Are you going to kill me like you almost killed her? That stopped him. He stared, his eyes wide. What are you talking about? You know. She ran away because she knew what you were. I stayed. But now I'm someone else. When I screamed, the neighbor heard. She was washing the yard. She started calling. Are you all right, Maggie? The silence stopped everything. He lay still, breathing heavily. I knocked hard on the door. Aunt Nora, help me. He's hitting me. She jumped over the wall. She came running. The front gate was broken down. Another neighbor came in. He said it was a family fight, that everything was fine. But my face was purple. The blood on my blouse said otherwise. I called the police. For the first time, I did, trembling, not knowing if they would believe me. But I called. When they arrived, he tried to make it up. He said I slipped, that I hurt myself. I looked at the policeman and said, Look into my eyes. I'm not lying. He looked at me. Then he looked at Grandma. Do you want us to go to the police station and talk? Grandma appeared at that moment, frightened, crying. She said it was a misunderstanding, that it was all in our heads, but it wasn't. And there, I understood. It didn't matter if they believed me or not. It mattered that I had finally spoken. In the end, they didn't arrest him. They said they were going to investigate. But something had changed, because now he knew that I was no longer silent. And when the word escapes, well, it doesn't come back. After the police left, the world didn't get any lighter. On the contrary, speaking seemed to pull a thread that began to unravel everything around it. The neighbor, Aunt Nora, tried to calm me down, telling me that I'd done the right thing and to keep my head up. But the others pretended they didn't know anything. The church people stopped saying hello. The girls at school whispered, not because they knew the whole truth, but because they smelled the scandal. And scandal, in this kind of town, is worse than crime. Grandma didn't speak to me for 3 days. She walked past me as if I were a shadow crossing the hallway. When she did open her mouth, she said that I had destroyed our family, that making up this kind of thing was the work of ungrateful people. I tried to explain. She wouldn't listen. She said that women who respect themselves don't need to expose themselves like that. That now everyone would look at me like I was dirty, as if being dirty was something I chose. He was still in the house. He wasn't arrested or taken away. All he got was a piece of paper, a warning that he was being investigated. He said it was my lie, that teenagers get angry, exaggerate, make things up. And the neighbors, oh, the neighbors. Some even thought I needed attention. Others said that he had always been a serious man, that old men don't do things like that. As if perversity had an expiration date. But I didn't keep quiet. I filed a report. I told them everything. The details that hurt, the hidden marks, the nights, the threats, the bracelet, the doll, the photos, the buried box. I said what I could, as much as my throat would allow. The deputy looked at me with a mixture of pity and anger. She asked why it had taken me so long. I explained that fear doesn't let time pass as it does in other places. When you're trapped, every minute is an eternity, and eternity doesn't have a clock. A social worker came to visit me. She wanted to understand the atmosphere in the house. She talked to Grandma, who said everything was fine. She talked to me, and I showed her the notebooks, the notes, the objects I had stored. She nodded, wrote them down, and said she'd make a referral. She talked about a psychologist, a shelter, measures, but the system is slow, and he was fast. The next night, he left a note on my bed. "You said it. Now hold on." And I did, because I no longer had a choice. I started sleeping with the door locked from the inside. I used the chest of drawers to block the entrance. I didn't sleep much. I dreamt about Rebecca. In the dream, she didn't speak. She just looked at me with a smudged face, holding a lit candle. I woke up sweating, taking deep breaths, holding the pillow as if it were my only shelter. At school, I came to be seen as that girl. No one said my name out loud. They avoided sitting near me. Teachers pretended not to see the bruises. When they asked if I was okay, it was only out of politeness, the kind of question that doesn't expect an answer. The only place I could still breathe was in the library. There, among the silent bookshelves, I wrote. More letters, more records, a diary hidden between the pages of a brown-covered book. In it, I talked to Rebecca. I told her everything. I said that I didn't know where she was, but that if she ever came back, I wanted her to know that I tried, that even with everything, I didn't let him erase us. One afternoon, I found an anonymous note in the school locker. "I saw when he touched you. I've been there too. If you want to talk, leave a red ribbon at the gate." My heart raced. I put the paper away. I looked around. I tried to identify who might have left it, but I didn't see anyone. I thought about answering. I thought about doing nothing. The uncertainty was worse than the silence. I decided to tie the ribbon. The next day, it was there. Another one, just like it. An answer. The first I'd received since it all began. I didn't know who it was. It didn't matter. What mattered was knowing that I wasn't the only one, and that maybe, just maybe, we could help each other. The atmosphere at home was getting worse. Grandma watched me like I was the enemy. Grandpa pretended not to care, but the look in his eyes was filled with hatred. One night, Grandma said to me, "If you carry on like this, I'll have to send you away." I replied that I should have done that years ago, because since I arrived there, I've only learned to survive, never really live. The next day, I received a letter, official, saying that the hearing had been scheduled, that I would have to testify, that the case was going ahead. I was scared. I trembled, but I didn't back down. I knew it would be difficult, that they would try to disprove me, that he'd be there, looking like a respectable old man. But I also knew it was my chance, not for justice, perhaps, but to say out loud everything that had been ripped away from me. I started walking more steadily. It still hurt. I was still bleeding inside, but I no longer lowered my eyes, because those who survive monsters can no longer bow to shadows. The hearing would be in 2 weeks. Until then, I needed to gather more than courage. I needed to find Rebecca, to know where she was, because if she showed up, everything would change. The world would have to listen to me. The letter from the hearing remained hidden inside my pillow for 4 days. Every time I picked it up, my heart leapt. The date set, the address of the court, his name written in those cold state machine letters. Nothing seemed real, and yet it was. And every second that passed reminded me that I was going to have to look at him, tell him everything in front of people who had never seen my pain, and convince everyone that I wasn't lying. Grandma pretended not to know. She spent the day going to and from church, as if the prayers were a shield against shame. To her neighbors, she said it was a teenage thing influenced by these modern television things. One of them, Joan, stopped me in the market and asked, with an air of advice, "Are you sure what you're doing, miss? It won't come undone later." I smiled with the corner of my mouth. I replied that what he did to me couldn't be undone either. She hadn't expected that. She lowered her eyes, picked up the packet of flour, and left without saying another word. At school, the isolation was complete. Conversations dwindled. Even glances avoided mine. A teacher called me into a corner and suggested that I take some time off so as not to harm the others, as if my presence was an open wound that tainted the atmosphere. But I didn't want to disappear. They had already erased me for years. Now, even though I was wounded, I was going to continue to exist. As the hearing drew closer, I began to look for traces of Rebecca. I knew she was never one to leave clues, but something in me told me she hadn't gone that far. I got the name of an old classmate of hers, Rachel, who had moved away 2 years earlier. Her geography teacher had the family's contact details. I wrote a simple, straightforward letter. I asked if they had seen my sister, if they knew anything, if they could help me. I sent it, with the hope that by some miracle there would be a reply before the court date. Meanwhile, the social worker visited me more often. She said that the prosecutor wanted more details. She asked me to write everything down again, by hand, like a diary. Reliving each scene was like walking barefoot on broken glass. But I wrote. I talked about the clothes that were ripped off, the sentences whispered in the dark, the silences imposed by force. Each word hurt, but it tied me to the ground. It was my proof. It was my cry. He, on the other hand, began to walk around the neighborhood more often. He talked loudly to the men in the bar. He laughed on the sidewalks. He greeted the children. He was the same stooped old man as always, only now he made a point of looking even more harmless. People saw this and said, "But look, such a good man." And I listened, swallowed, and let them think, because now I knew. The truth is more frightening when it comes from those who have never had a voice. The day before the hearing, I found an envelope under the door. No sender. Inside, a photo of Rebecca, older, with shorter hair, holding a child on her lap. Behind the picture, an address in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My hands were shaking. I ran to the street, looked around, looked for someone. No one. I ran back. I showed it to the assistant. She confirmed that they could try to locate her based on the address, but that would take time, more than I had. Even so, I went to sleep with the photo under my pillow. I looked at her face until my eyes stung. I tried to imagine her voice, her smell, the way she smiled when we locked ourselves in her room to play, guess the shapes in the clouds. I kept telling myself, she's alive. She survived. That's possible. And if she survived, so could I. The day came. I woke up before the sun. I showered slowly, like someone washing not just their body, but their whole soul. I put on the only clothes that didn't have any patches. I tied my hair up the way Grandma liked, even though I knew she wouldn't even look at me. When I came out of the bedroom, she was sitting on the chair in the living room with her rosary between her fingers. All she said was, "You'll regret messing with what you should have kept quiet." I replied that he who is silent consents, and I had already consented too much. The delegate met me at the door of the courthouse. She was kind, but in the hurry of someone who has too many cases and not enough time. We entered through a side room. They explained how it would be, who would be there, that I could ask for a break if I couldn't stand it. I said I didn't need to. I'd put up with him for years. I could stand it for a few minutes with witnesses nearby. When I came in, I saw him sitting at the front, shirt ironed, hair combed. You could forget who he was if we didn't know better. Behind him, two friends from the workshop. One of them whispered to the other, "That girl is going to ruin the old man's life." I stared straight at them. I didn't turn away. The judge asked for silence. My name was called. I went to the place marked. My voice faltered for the first two words. Then it steadied. I counted, one piece at a time, without exaggeration. No frills, the way it always was. I talked about the first time he called me in the basement, the note on the bed, the slaps, the hidden bruises. I showed him the notes. I handed over the papers. When I asked if I could read an excerpt from the diary, the judge allowed it. I read it. The words trembled in my mouth, but they came out. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted longer than it should have. The prosecutor thanked me. His defender stood up and tried to disqualify what I'd said. She suggested it was fantasy, that teenagers create alternative realities when they experience trauma. I laughed, and I said that trauma doesn't need imagination. It's enough. I left the room with limp legs, but with my heart beating fast. The hearing was over. The process would continue. It would take time. But now it was no longer a secret. It was there, documented, signed, stamped. He could try to hide it. But now everyone knew, and even if nothing happened, even if he remained free, I was no longer a prisoner. Now he was the one in hiding. After the hearing, I walked home slowly, like someone stepping on a minefield. The street seemed narrower, the sun paler, and the windows, those windows were all ajar, as if each curtain hid a pair of eyes. No one spoke, but everyone knew, and what they did know, everyone made up their own version. It was as if, by telling the truth, I had destroyed a collective fantasy that they insisted on keeping alive. Grandma was waiting for me, her hands in her lap, her eyes on the floor. She didn't ask how it went, nor did she want to know what they'd said. When she saw me, she just got up and went to her room. The closed door was louder than a scream. Ever since it all started, she preferred to hide behind prayer, as if faith was an excuse for omission. I didn't even feel angry anymore. I just felt so tired that I wanted to lie on the floor and sleep for weeks. The next day, I went to school, even though I knew what awaited me. Some looked at me with pity, others with disdain. A group of girls who had previously greeted me turned their faces away. A teacher praised my literature work, but avoided any eye contact. The principal called me in and said that if I wanted to, I could do the exams at home. She said it was to protect myself. I understood. I wanted to hide, to push me back into the hole I'd crawled out of. I refused. I said I was going to finish the year there, in the same place I started, because I wasn't the one to be ashamed of. In the workshop, where he still appeared from time to time, they said he was ill, stressed, upset by the things they'd invented against him. That's how they put it. They made it up, as if the details, the notebooks, the injuries, the neighbors' scream, everything was theatre. The men from the church commented on the bench in the square that there are things that should stay within the family. The women in the neighborhood lowered the volume of their conversation when I passed by. Only the dogs barked in the same way. Aunt Nora, the neighbor who had heard my screams, was the only one who didn't change. She brought coffee, asked if I needed help with the shopping, left encouraging notes in my mailbox. One of them said, "Talking is hard, but so is listening." And I listened, I believe. That held me up on the days when everything seemed to fall apart again. A week after the hearing, I received a letter. The envelope was thick, crumpled, with a Louisiana stamp. I didn't recognize the handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands. It was from Rebecca. "Ellie, I heard from a girl who met you at the forum. She said you told her everything, that you didn't keep quiet. I can't thank you enough for that. I always thought it was just me, that I'd made it up, that my body was weak, my head even worse. I ran away because I thought no one would listen. I left you there, and I carry that guilt with me every day. But when I got the news that you had spoken, something in me fell apart. You were my voice when I lost mine. I live with a friend. I raised my daughter away from that house. I never wanted her to know what happened to us. Now I see that maybe it was a mistake to hide so much. But the truth hurts, and I still don't know if I can go back to the city. I don't know if I'd have the courage to look into Grandma's eyes, or in his. I just wanted you to know. I'm alive. I'm fine. And I'm here. Even from afar. Write to me when you can. Tell me everything. I love you. Always. Rebecca. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped the paper. I sat on the balcony floor and cried like I hadn't cried since the first time he touched me. Rebecca was alive. She had followed, resisted, built something. And she knew. She knew now that I had fought for both of them. I wrote back that same night. I told her what I could. I kept the heaviest details. I promised to visit when I could. I said that her daughter must be beautiful, that I wanted to meet her, that there was a lot in store for her. The rest of the words stuck. I wrote 3 pages. I threw 2 away. I sent the last one. At the courthouse, the case continued. More witnesses were called. The school provided documents. The neighbor confirmed what she had seen. The delegate stood firm. The prosecutor said that there were still gaps in the case, but that public pressure was growing. I knew that real justice wasn't guaranteed, but just the fact that they were looking at what had previously been ignored was a start. He began to disappear from the city. He showed up less. Sometimes he didn't even come home. He said he was traveling, sorting things out. Grandma, even without admitting it, seemed restless. She was paler, quieter. One day she came into my room, sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Are you sure about everything you said?" I replied that I remembered every word, every smell, every touch. She cried, quietly. She said she would rather have died than know that she had created a monster. I didn't hug her. I just left her there, because that remorse wasn't mine to console. The case made the headlines in the local paper. Teenager accuses grandfather of childhood crimes. Some laughed. Others commented on it in the stores, but no one else could pretend they didn't know. The night I received confirmation that Rebecca was going to testify by letter, I looked in the mirror and saw another girl. A girl who was beaten, shut up, but not broken. The girl who stayed, who held the weight of the two, who was finally pushing hell back into the hole it should never have climbed out of. Rebecca's letter didn't take long to arrive in the file. The deputy printed out her statement, attached it to the evidence, and put it together with my notes. The prosecutor said it carried weight, that it confirmed the pattern. It showed that I wasn't an isolated case, but it was still just another step, because unfortunately, on paper, words still needed more than truth. They needed consistency, courage, and luck. In the city, rumors began to circulate that Rebecca had been paid to lie. They said that I had set her up, that it was revenge, because he didn't want to pay for a course for me. A man from the workshop jokingly commented that these girls today want fame, they want attention. I heard from a neighbor that he may have made a mistake, but they also provoke. It was as if, once again, it was our fault. Always our fault. Because it's easier to blame the victim than to face the rotten person who lives in the front room. He, of course, didn't keep quiet. He said I had mental problems, that I needed treatment, that my sister had always been unstable, that they had both been making things up since they were little. At one of the next hearings, his lawyer handed over a false report from a psychologist nobody knew. It said that I had traces of memory distortion. I wanted to laugh, but I swallowed my laughter, because what I really wanted was to see how far he would go with that circus. At the same time, Grandma fell ill. Physically, it didn't look serious, but she withered away. She stopped going out, stopped cooking, and spent most of her time sitting, staring at nothing. One day, she called my name in a weak voice. I went into the bedroom. She was holding a photograph of my parents. She said she felt guilty about everything, that she should have realized, that she should have done something. I stood there listening, and for the first time, I felt sorry, because there, in that tired body, there was no more connivance, only bankruptcy. Meanwhile, at school, a teacher called me again, the same one who had avoided contact before. She said that she had reviewed the material, that she had read the diary attached to the file. She apologized for having omitted herself. She said she now saw how much we fail when we choose silence. I didn't cry, nor did I say thank you. I just said that the apology came late, but it was still useful. In the street, people's looks began to change. Some still avoided me, but others passed by and mumbled a "go ahead," a congratulations for not shutting up. Aunt Nora spread copies of the newspaper with the article about the reopening of the case. They didn't use my name in the article, but everyone knew, and that was enough. Then it happened. He tried to escape. One night, he packed his suitcase, left the house through the back door, hitched a ride with an acquaintance, and disappeared. When the police found out, they said he had been seen trying to cross into Alabama. He didn't make it. They picked him up at a bus station. He had false documents, money hidden in his socks, and a lame excuse on the tip of his tongue. At the police station, he said he was afraid of the threats he'd been receiving, that he was afraid for his life, that he felt persecuted, that his granddaughter wanted him dead. The cameras recorded everything. His despair wasn't regret. It was fear of losing control, of seeing the theatre collapse with the lights on. The prosecutor laughed when he heard the news. He said that now, in addition to the main crime, he would be charged with attempted escape and ideological falsehood. The judge asked for the case to be moved forward urgently, and yet I still felt a lump in my throat, because part of me still thought that, somehow, he could get away with it. The law doesn't always know what to do with monsters dressed as grandfathers. I wrote to Rebecca again. I told her everything. His desperation, his attempt to escape, Grandma's reaction, the move from the city. I asked about her daughter. I asked for a photo. I said that, despite everything, I still wanted to see them both, that maybe we could meet somewhere where the past wouldn't weigh so heavily. A few days later, the reply came. She said that she read my letters at night, with her daughter asleep on her lap, that she was still crying, that she felt torn between going back and staying away, that she wanted justice, but was afraid of being sucked back into that hole. I understood, and I told her that even though she was far away, she was part of this turning point, that none of this would have any strength if it hadn't been for her courage to write first. Grandma got worse. She was hospitalized. Guilt, weight, age, it all came together. I went to visit her. I would sit quietly, holding her hand. Sometimes she would mumble something about my grandfather's childhood, about a violent father, an absent mother. She'd try to justify it. I listened, but deep down I knew a wound doesn't justify a wound. Then came the notice of the next hearing, the one where he would be officially tried. The prosecutor was confident. He said that the testimonies, the documents, the escape attempt, everything pointed to a conviction, but he urged caution, because there could still be surprises. His lawyer was cunning. He knew how to twist words until they seemed true. The night before the trial, I slept very little. I went over every memory, every pain, every silence. I put on the same clothes as the first hearing. I wanted him to see me with the same strength, the girl he tried to break, and who now carried the evidence of her own survival. I knew that trial wouldn't erase the past, but maybe, just maybe, it would begin to liberate the future. The courtroom was packed. I've never seen so many people together in a room with no music, no party, just waiting. It wasn't pure curiosity. It was that kind of presence that mixes astonishment, judgment, and a certain morbid pleasure in watching the pain of others. There were ladies in flowered dresses, boys from the workshop, people from the church, school children, even a journalist with a notebook in his hand. Everyone was there to see what would happen. I walked in slowly, trying to control my legs. The social worker walked beside me, firmly, as if she were holding my spine in place. The prosecutor was already there, with the papers stacked up. His lawyer, of course, was straightening his jacket like someone preparing for a parade. And he, the old man, sitting in the same chair, with the same look he wore when he lied to his neighbor about being a family man. That look that deceives those who want to be deceived. The judge was direct. She said it wouldn't be a show. She wanted respect, silence, and attention. They started with the documents. They showed the diary, the notes, the letters, the photo of Rebecca with her daughter, the medical records, the school notes, a sequence of evidence that traced the timeline of the horror. I stayed upright, my eyes fixed on the back wall. Hearing it all again hurt, but I needed to hear it, because it was true. because every word spoken there was a part of me being unearthed. When it was the defense lawyer's turn, he tried everything. He said there was a lack of physical evidence. That time was the enemy of precision, that memories get confused. He tried to paint a picture of me as unstable, manipulative, influenced by sad stories. He talked about my parents' death as if that justified any invention. I listened without turning away. His every sentence was an insult, but also a confirmation. Anyone who needs to misrepresent so much has no way of denying it. An unexpected witness was called, a former employee of the workshop, a quiet man who never spoke to me. He said that he once saw the old man come out of the basement wiping his hands, his face upset, and that he heard the muffled sound of crying outside. He couldn't tell if it was mine, but even though it was vague, it weighed heavy, because it showed that no one else could pretend not to have noticed anything. After that, the judge called my name. I stood up. I walked to the front. The chair was waiting for me, but I preferred to stand. I started telling about my childhood. The first day I arrived at that house, the way he looked at me, the day Rebecca jumped out of the window. I talked about the basement, the threats, the marks. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I spoke with the firmness of someone who doesn't want pity, only recognition. I showed her my sister's letter. I read a passage. The judge listened attentively. The audience was silent. The air in the room seemed dense, heavy, as if every breath had to ask permission. When I finished, I looked directly at him. For the first time in months, I saw fear in his eyes, a fear that didn't come from me, but from what I had become. The prosecutor closed with a summary. He said that this case was about more than an isolated crime. It was about the silence that kills more than any blow, about girls who grow up thinking that pain is normal, about families who prefer to protect names rather than bodies. The judge asked for a break before the verdict. I went into the next room. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking. The social worker held my arm. She said I'd come too far to go back. I agreed. But inside me, there was still the doubt. Is it really going to happen? Everyone was called back. The room seemed smaller. The judge came in. She read the opinion calmly. Every word cut through the air. When she said guilty, there was no shouting or clapping, just a different kind of silence, a silence of relief, of fright, of justice. The sentence called for prison. Years, many years, and even if it wasn't enough to make up for everything, it was what could be done now. He was led away in handcuffs. He tried not to look at anyone, but when he passed me, he stopped. He said softly, "You destroyed the family." I replied in a firm whisper, "No, I just took my mask off," and I turned my face away. On the way out, some people approached me. One woman was crying. She said she'd been through something similar. A boy said his sister wanted to meet me. Someone touched my shoulder and said, "You've saved more than yourself." I didn't know how to react. I just said thank you. I felt, for the first time, that I was no longer alone. That evening, I went to Aunt Nora's house. Grandma was still in hospital. The house seemed empty, as if it had been exorcised. The silence inside was different. It didn't threaten. It wasn't suffocating. It just was. I lay down on the sofa. I looked at the ceiling. I felt a weight come off slowly. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a beginning, a sweaty, painful beginning, earned with every drop of pain I had poured out in silence over the years. Rebecca called later. She said she'd seen the news. She cried. She said she wanted to come. I told her I was in no hurry, that now we could rebuild at the right time. And so, in that cramped room of a simple house, with the window ajar, I felt something I hadn't felt for a long time. Peace. Not the peace of someone who forgets, but the peace of someone who faces. The peace of those who survive. The peace of those who speak. After the sentence, the city fell silent. Not the silence of before, which drowned out the screams. A different kind, more restless, one that recognizes the weight of what it pretended not to see. The faces didn't disappear, but the looks changed. The whispers, too. Now it wasn't whether I was lying, it was whether anyone else had been through something similar. His name became a whisper, a shadow that no one wanted in their backyard. And yet there were still people who blamed me for ruining the family surname. I went back to Aunt Nora's for a few days. Grandma was discharged, but she didn't ask for me back. I sent her flowers, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to end the story with something lighter than anger. She didn't reply, and deep down, that was to be expected. With her, the conversation always ended before it began. I received many letters afterwards, from older women, young girls, even men who said they felt guilty for pretending not to know. I kept them all in a box that I keep next to my bed, not because I like to remember, but because I need to, because every word in there is proof that opening your mouth, even when you're trembling, changes something. The school called me to finish the year. I didn't have long to go. I went back. I sat at the same desk, with the same notebook. The difference was that now no one pretended I didn't exist. Some still avoided me. Others began to respect me in silence. A teacher asked me to help him with an assignment on social justice. I accepted. Not because I want to become an example, but because if pain has become a tool, let it at least serve to prevent others from going through the same thing. Rebecca came in December. She arrived by bus, with a backpack on her back and her daughter on her lap. When I saw the two of them getting off at the terminal, I thought my heart would burst out of my throat. We didn't run to each other. We just stared for a few seconds. Then she walked up to me and hugged me so tightly that I felt time fall apart on her back. The little girl shyly hid behind her mother's legs. Rebecca said, "That's the Ellie I told you about?" And the little girl smiled, embarrassed. We spent days talking, remembering what could be remembered, skipping over what still hurt too much. We laughed at some parts. We cried in others. We cooked together. We baked cakes, just like Mom used to. We visited our parents' graves. Rebecca brought flowers. I brought silence. We sat there for hours. No rush. She wanted to visit her grandmother. She said she needed to close her own loop. I went along. The house was the same. The white picket fence, the balcony with the rocking chair, the plant wilting in the corner. When Grandma opened the door, it locked. She looked at us as if she'd seen a haunting. Rebecca spoke first. "Hi, Grandma. This is my daughter." The old woman didn't answer. She just nodded. The girl went inside, pulling her mother. I stayed at the door. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. The conversation was short. No drama. No apologies. Rebecca said she was alive, that she had raised her daughter with dignity. Grandma held her great-granddaughter's hand, but couldn't face either of them for long. When we left, she said, "I should have protected you." Rebecca replied, "We learned to protect ourselves." On the way out, I walked slowly to the gate. I ran my fingers along the railing, as I used to do when I was a girl. I didn't feel nostalgia, nor sadness, just the certainty that this place no longer belonged to me. In time, Rebecca returned to Louisiana. She sent photos of her daughter, now growing up and learning to read. They called me Aunt Ellie, and that warmed a corner of my chest that I thought had died. I stayed in the city. I finished school. I worked as a library assistant. Then I started helping out in projects with girls at risk. I never told them my whole story. I just said, if it hurts, talk. Talking saves. The old man died 2 years later. In jail. Natural causes, they said. No visit. No burial with flowers. Nobody claimed the body for days. He was buried as an indigent. The town didn't even comment. It was as if he had been erased, as he liked to do with others. But nobody asked me if I wanted to know. I found out from the newspaper. And I didn't cry. I just closed the page and went about my life. Today, at 79, I look back and see that surviving wasn't pretty. It was necessary. I didn't become strong because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. I carry scars that don't show up on any scans. Sometimes I dream of the basement, of the open window, Rebecca's voice saying, "Run." I wake up sweating, but I get up. I make coffee. I write another letter that I may never send. If you've listened this far, leave a like, dear. It's not out of vanity. It's because every like is like someone saying, "I heard you. I believe." And for a woman like me, that's worth more than any sentence. Because some things never heal. But listening already heals a lot.